What is Time? By Francis T.S.U. What is time? Without a mathematical, symbolic substituted language, science would be very difficult to facilitate. This is precisely why science needs mathematics, but mathematics does not need science. But one of the most intriguing quantities in science must be time. Without the existence of time, there would be no space and no science, of which time is the only quantity from which every physically realizable science cannot be dissociated. Since all the physically realizable sciences cannot exist without time, every physical realizable science can only exist at the current moment of time, that is, t equals 0. Time must be a carrier instead of a variable that can be manipulated, for this is a law of nature, that is, temporal t is greater than 0, for which every physically realizable mechanics must obey. For example, every hypothesis must be developed within a temporal space, by which its solution would be physically realizable. The existence of time is a must, of which our universe is a dynamic temporal subspace even before it was created. Since it is time that initiates the creation, that is, a space that has time, otherwise our time-space cannot be created, by which it is time that changes space, but not space changing time. Since every physically realizable substance moves with time, time is a space carrier that moves from the current to the next time-space, of which every physically realizable space must be temporal, that is, t is greater than 0. For example, even a simple Ohm's law, that is, V equals IR, voltage equals current times resistance, is not a physically realizable law since it has no time. Why do we need time? It is not why we need time. Time exists whether we like it or not, for which time is a law of nature. Since every physically realizable substance is associated with time, that is temporal, t greater than 0, this means that every subspace is a time space, but it is time which moves the space, but not space moving time. Since time created our time-space, but not space creates time, the creation of our universe must be created within a space which has time, from which creation must start within a temporal space, for which the existence of time must be the law of our science that cannot be dissociated. This is exactly why every hypothetical science must be situated within a temporal regime. It guarantees its solution will be physically realizable. From this we can easily show that Einstein's relativity, as well as Schrödinger's quantum mechanics, reference 1, are virtual as mathematics. But time is the law of our universe, and a solution that violates the law of time is not a viable solution. Nevertheless, within the heavenly realm, it is only the temporal space that we know that harbors time. However, it is not beyond our ability to discover, or that forces us to create a substation to replace, such as Einstein's 4D space-time continuum, which has misled us for over a century. Aside, our universe is a temporal dynamic space, and a question remains: why does it exist as a temporal universe? Which is precisely the reason for science is to discover, but not to create one. For which it is wrong to create one such as Einstein's 4D space-time that has stopped us from further discoveries. Since temporal is the law of time, any hypothesis must follow this law. But all our fundamental principles were developed from an empty space paradigm, reference 1. This is precisely why our fundamental physics was hijacked by mathematical physicists, but mathematical physics is not a physically realizable science. Reference 1, Francis Yu, Introduction to Physically Realizable Physics. Origin of our space-time. Since the origin of our universe must start within a space that has time, that is a temporal space t greater than 0, which is a necessary condition for time to carry out the creation as depicted in Figure 1, in which without the pretext of time in a space, it has no other means that can initiate a temporal universe creation. Added, creation cannot be mathematically postulated such as Einstein's 4D space-time model, as the existence of time and space is a necessary and sufficient condition. In other words, without time there would be no space. Nevertheless, time changes the space to the next moment of time, but not space changing the time, for which it is the law of time that changes space. For example, if a space has no time, how can the space move on to the next time? This is precisely the kind of time-space we live in that cannot be created by any other means. If there are anywhere in the heavenly sky that we can live in, so far, it cannot be existent within our time-space, our universe. In other words, it is only temporal universe, but not other mathematical space that can harbor our existence, by which all other speculated creation scenarios are not physically realizable and are fakes. For example, Einstein's relativistic and Schrodinger's quantum worlds were created. Figure 1 shows a temporal space within a greater temporal space where time is the same everywhere. Our temporal universe is an energy-conserving dynamic subspace, in which we see that it is time carrying the space to the next moment of time-space, but it is not the space that changes time. Once again, we see that without time in the space has no way to change time. Note that when a space has been changed by time, that space cannot change back, since it has been taken or carried away by time, as presented by a temporary composited universe depicted in Figure 2. For example, the moment of yourself has been changed almost instantaneously, since you are at a time-space within our universe. In other words, it is time that carried you to the next moment of your physical reality, yet that moment of yourself cannot be returned, since it has been carried away by time that cannot be returned, from which, once and again, it is impossible for Einstein's relativity as well as Schrodinger's quantum world to be correct, since both violated the law of time, that is, temporal greater than 0. Figure 2 shows a dynamic time-composited expanding universe in which it is time that's changing the universe, but not the universe changing time, by which temporal, that is, t is greater than 0, is the law of our universe. We live in a space that has time. Firstly, it is not our choice, since there are no other subspaces that we can live in. Secondly, we must change with time, since our self is a time-space. Nevertheless, time and timelessness are mutually exclusive. Any physically realizable thing within our universe must be temporal, that is, t greater than 0, of which everything within our universe must exist with the same pace of time, which is the law of our universe. This means that every physically realizable science cannot dissociate with time, in which time is a carrier that transforms everything to the next moment of time. Are there any other subspaces in the heavenly sky that can harbor us? The answer is no, because our universe is the only time-space that has time. Nevertheless, there may have been heavenly spaces without time, but those heavenly spaces are speculated or mathematically created. For example, Einstein's 4D space-time continuum is one of them. Is there somewhere within our universe that can harbor us? So far, planet Earth is the only one we know, but it's very likely that there are many planets that can harbor life. Nevertheless, what makes things change, it must be time, from which time is one of the most intriguing laws that we have discovered, that it cannot be simply changed or created. Nevertheless, after all the years of human observation, we are still wondering what is time. Even some well-known scientists think time is an illusion, and many of them believe that we can change time. I am so disappointed that many of them still cannot figure out the distance between us and yesterday of us. Instead of finding out the truth, one evenly mathematically created a space-time that violated all the laws of nature. Intentionally or not, that I let you to determine. For example, a legendary Richard Feynman had pointed out that, as I quote, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics," end quote. Yet he opted to follow it. Please tell me what motivated him to follow it. Is it because he cannot understand quantum mechanics that we should not understand? Nonetheless, time is always a myth in our life. Without a clear picture of what time is, it would be very difficult to carry on the discussion on physically realizable science, since one of the best observable platforms must be the daily events that cannot be repeated, which tells us every event goes with time and cannot be repeated. Yet we have opted to accept a 4D space-time continuum of Einstein. Even knowing that his space-time violates all the laws of nature, but we are holding fast by his doctrine like a religious tenet. Since everything is gone with time, which is a time that we have discovered? My question is that why we must mathematically create time, instead of accepting the one that we have discovered. Yet we know mathematics was created, but mathematics alone is not science, since laws of nature are supposed to be discovered, but not created. Gone with time. It is time that moves us, but not that we move time. Otherwise, we will never get old and will never die. One easy way to find out that time changes us, if one can figure out the distance between one and an hour ago of us, then one may know it is time that moves us, from which we know that everything in our universe changes with time. In other words, every existent thing is associated with time, where time is a forward variable as from a mathematical standpoint, but everything is associated with time. For example, can you go behind or ahead of yourself? The answer is no, since we must go with time. This is the experimental fact that we have observed repeatedly, which does not need mathematics for proof. For example, every physically realizable consequence or science is gone with time. This is precisely why physically realizable, that is, physically real science, cannot be exploited for applications, since it has gone with the time, in which the law of time, that is temporal, t greater than 0, must be the law of our universe. All fundamental principles cannot be violated. Although subjectively you feel that you had never departed from yourself, but you know that you are moving with time. But why are we changing with time? It is because we are a subspace of our temporal universe, which it is wrong to assume time is an illusion, as some physicists think. Nevertheless, time is a tenet and a law of our universe. Yet the foundation of our physics was developed from an empty space-time platform which has no time. Reference 2. This is the irony of our fundamental physics, which is not a physically realizable physics. Believe me or not, open any physics textbook, you will find our foundation is developed from an empty, timeless subspace. Reference 3. Reference 2 is Francis Yu, Introduction to Physically Realizable Physics. Reference 3 by Abel, Morrison, and Wolf, Exploration of the Universe. Some remarks. Although science is mathematics, yet mathematics is not science. Since science is to discover, but mathematics is man-made, of which mathematics permits paradoxes that science does not, for which it is wrong for mathematically oriented physicists to create science, even though we are unable to discover it. As Richard Feynman has said, that as I quote, I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics, end quote. Yet he followed quantum mechanics without the imposition of the law of time. This is precisely why his QED, that is, quantum electrodynamics, is wrong. You can easily prove it if you submerge his QED hypothesis within a temporal subspace. You may see his hypothesis violates the law of time. Similarly, if one submerges Einstein's relativity hypothesis in our temporal space-time, one can show it is impossible to obtain his relativity theory. Then, if Einstein's theory is wrong, how can Hawking's justify his black hole theory is correct? And so on. Conclusion. In conclusion, I have shown that time, that is temporal t greater than 0, is the law of our universe that cannot be substituted by the 4D space-time continuum of Einstein. This is precisely the reason why our modern physics is so wrong, since Einstein's space-time is not a temporal space that violates the law of time. Since physically realizable science must obey the law of time, unfortunately our fundamental physics was built on a space without time. That is, it's a empty space paradigm. This is the reason why our science is not a physically realizable physics. It's mostly mathematically created. Yet mathematics does not need to obey the law of time, from which I have discovered practically all the fundamental laws of physics are not physically realizable. This is precisely the reason why our modern physics is so wrong. It is because we have followed Einstein's space-time continuum. Although our universe is a temporal space, it is time within the space that governs the space, and not the space changes time. In words, it is time that carries the space to the next moment of time, for which any physically realizable principle is required to develop within a temporal space, for which its solution would be physically realizable. Nevertheless, why the universe has time? It is because our universe was created on a greater temporal space. Otherwise, creation would have no time to initiate. Finally, time is the law we have discovered. Beyond that, one should not speculate or to create one. Thank you.